Hey everyone, as the clock keeps ticking down to the first Friday in May, it's time for another edition of the Oaks Countdown. Nicole Russo in Lexington, Kentucky, and Dan Illman from our New York studio. And we'll start off, as we always do, by taking a peek at the current point standings toward a spot in the starting gate for the Kentucky Oaks, which is limited to 14 starters. Champaign Anyone, who we discussed last week, leaping to the top of the list with her victory in the Gulfstream Oaks. That was part of this final stretch of preps, offering 100 points to the respective winners, essentially win and you're in races. And we have a major Saturday of those coming up on tap. The Ashland here in Kentucky, where we expect to see champion juvenile Jaywalk trying to bounce back. The Gazelle up in New York, where Espresso Shot will look to roll on. And, of course, the Santa Anita Oaks, where we will see Grade 1 winner Bellafina trying to punch her ticket. Dan, there has been some concerns expressed about her ability to run a distance. This race will determine if she moves on to the Oaks or if she targets prestigious one-turn races like the Acorn and the Test down the road.
And that question is confounding to just about everybody, from handicappers to pedigree experts alike. I mean, you look at her pedigree, she's by Quality Road. Quality Road can get a good 9 furlong horse. She's a full sister to Diamond King, a stakes winner at 1 1/8. But Diamond King also had his sort of questions about whether 9 furlongs was really stretching it for him. The dam and the second dam did their best running sprinting, but the dam's also a half to a graded stakes winner going 1 1/8 on the turf. There is a lot of versatility in this pedigree, and the fact that Bellafina has shown enough brilliance to win sprinting and enough ability to win going 1 1/16 makes this question all the more puzzling. We may not find out whether she wants 9 furlongs until the first Friday in May.
Yeah, we'll watch one of her Grade 1 victories last year here, the Chandelier, around 2 turns, which you mentioned. From there, she went on to finish 4th in the juvenile fillies. She was shipping for the first time. She was later reported to be in heat. Her trip, wasn't very troubled, but wasn't perfect. I think young horses deserve a mulligan here and there. Perhaps that was just hers for last season. As you mentioned, from a pedigree standpoint, I really do love her moving on and stretching out. Quality Road has already sired a Kentucky Oaks winner and champion in Abel Tasman a couple of years ago. Very versatile stallion. He also has top-level 2-turn dirt winners like City of Light, Caledonia Road, and others. Dam Akron Moon, as you mentioned, a sprint winner out of a graded winning sprinter. But Akron Moon by stamina-influenced Malibu Moon, that son of AP Indy, the broodmare sire of the likes of Stellar Wind and others. The full brother Diamond King, a stakes winner going 1 1/8. And in terms of talent, I think Bellafina really just stands out in a 3-year-old filly class that's been a little bit chaotic this season.
Oh, I agree. And as we saw on the points leaders leaderboard, she has the highest buyer speed figure of all the 3-year-old fillies listed with a 95. And as we saw in that Chandelier Stakes, that was a very, very impressive performance. It was her first time around 2 turns. She rated successfully off a horse for the first time in her career. And that was the day that Simon Callahan took the blinkers off. In her prior couple of races, she was very awkward with her final lead change, but in watching the Chandelier, very professional with her lead changes, stayed on her right lead all the way down to the wire. You mentioned the issues she had in the Breeders' Cup juvenile fillies, and she has come back rocking as a 3-year-old filly. A perfect 2 for 2, although it must be noted thus far, after 7 starts, her 2 fastest races have come in sprints.
They have, but she does have that ability, I think, to win around 2 turns. As we said, Saturday going to be a key test for her. We'll take a look also at her most recent victory here, kind of a more workmanlike score over Anaya Al Rab, who we've discussed all winter as a nice filly with a stellar pedigree in her own right. You're watching Bellafina, dig in and hold on very nicely.
And I think a lot of folks were a little bit concerned how workmanlike this race was without giving Anaya Al-Rab her due, Anaya Al-Rab is a very improving filly who might be coming up to the Kentucky Oaks the right way on the first Friday in May, and there shouldn't be any distance issues with her. But Bellafina was 1-10 to win that day. Maybe she didn't appreciate a little bit of moisture in the track. It was a good racetrack. It was also a speed-friendly racetrack, and Bellafina has the early speed and the tactical speed to make that kind of trip. Maybe she took advantage of the track that day. She is not exactly a slam dunk on Saturday, although she is going to be an odds-on favorite and the most heavily watched 3-year-old filly in any of the preps. But I agree with you. She also is the most talented and also, as we stated, the most confounding from a pedigree standpoint.
And, you know, as you mentioned, and as we mentioned at the top of the show, Saturday, a huge day of preps around the country for the Kentucky Oaks as well as the Kentucky Derby. What else are we looking for on Saturday from your standpoint?
The key to the Ashland is whether Jaywalk can run anymore. I'm willing to be a lot more forgiving than other handicappers based on her debacle at Gulfstream in her first start of the year. We know she is a better filly than that, and something tells me that the real Jaywalk will show up and run a much improved race in the Ashland, because she's going to have to if she's going to punch her ticket to the Kentucky Oaks. I wonder if Chad Brown is lurking in the weeds with Feedback, who's going to get the first real class test of her career if she participates in the Ashland on Saturday. That, to me, is the one to watch. And then you've got some old standbys for sophomore fillies like Restless Rider, Chocolate Kisses. These fillies punch hard in the stretch. I think the Ashland might be the most competitive race of the three. I think the Gazelle, they have some nice fillies, but those fillies have a lot to prove. That Ashland Stakes, to me, that's a must-see race.
Yeah, and you know, you mentioned Restless Rider, looking to move on and punch her ticket to the Oaks. Restless Rider, we saw last fall, loves Keeneland. She's trained very well at Churchill Downs. I think, she could be kind of a sneaky good filly moving ahead on the spring here. The Ashland, I think, going to have a very deep, competitive field. Espresso Shot may be the standout in the Gazelle off of her most recent win in New York. I know that they were considering at one point training her up to the Kentucky Oaks, decided it was a little bit too much of a gap there, decided to run her one more time. I'm wondering if, knowing that they kind of went back and forth on that decision, if perhaps she will not be fully cranked for this race on Saturday, and if someone else will have a chance to step up, which could give you a little more value on Espresso Shot moving forward into the Oaks if you are on her bandwagon. But I do think that that could be a wide open race up there.
I think that's a wide open race. The New York crop of 3-year-old fillies is screaming out for somebody to run a fast race. Espresso Shot has run some really nice races, no doubt about it. We are still waiting for the fast one. Her best buyer, as we saw on the leaderboard, an 80 going into Saturday's Gazelle. She's obviously going to have to do a lot better than that if she's going to win a race like the Kentucky Oaks. But Nicole, I think you made a very, very interesting point. Not just for Espresso Shot, not just for the Gazelle, but for all of these prep races this weekend. There's a reason they call them prep races. These trainers and connections want these young 3-year-old fillies to peak on Kentucky Oaks Day, not in the final prep race. So perhaps we will see an upset or two, and then maybe one of these favorites return to form on Oaks Day.
Yeah, we talk all the time about trainer intent, and I do think it comes into play here. I think you really have to look at these fillies and say, who already has their points? Who needs to run how well to get into the field? Who is working bullets in the morning? What do trainers usually work in the morning? And who's maybe coming up to these preps a little more easily, a little more reserved? If you like a filly right now at this point of the year, depending on how they run in the final round of preps, there may or may not be a reason to get off your bandwagon, depending on a loss, coming up to the Oaks. So I do think you have to consider prep season and trainer intent.
Agreed. You just can't have a bomb like Jaywalk had at Gulfstream. You have to have a decent performance, a race that's rock solid, maybe not a winning effort, but you can't have a real true dud going into the final race before the Kentucky Oaks. You have to at least be sharp enough leading into the race.
Yeah, well, as we discussed, 3 races on Saturday offering 100 points to the winner. Win and you're in to the Kentucky Oaks. One more 100-point prep next week in the Fantasy at Oaklawn. We'll be back next week on the Oaks Countdown to recap and look ahead to all of this action as things are really heating up.